The Positive Pause is a motivational-minded podcast covering topics women want to know about as they journey to and through menopause, focusing on subjects that impact women's health and healthy aging, including what it means to age healthfully. The Positive Pause features experts and influencers from a variety of industries and specialties. The information and opinions expressed on The Positive Pause are not intended to replace the services of trained professionals or to provide specific medical advice. To see the National Menopause Foundation's full medical disclaimer, please visit nationalmenopausefoundation.org.
Welcome to The Positive Pause. I'm Claire Gill, founder of the National Menopause Foundation. Joining me for this episode is Sonia Satra, an executive coach and mind-body thought leader who specializes in personal transformation to create lasting change. As the founder and CEO of Moticise, an award-winning wellness program that combines movement with mindset, Sonia travels the world helping individuals, teams, and business leaders reach their own personal greatness. Sonia regularly coaches business leaders, entrepreneurs, and others in the corporate world to improve communication, foster teamwork and productivity, and create a culture of wellness. Her book, What If It Were Easy? Using Movement and Mindset to Create Success in Life, Love, and Business, uses a one-of-a-kind mind-body method of integrating creative thinking and problem-solving into physical activity. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sonia.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful to speak with you again. We've had an opportunity to connect before, and I'm excited to talk about the courage to change today. We could talk about change in many ways, but I first want to touch on making career changes at midlife. We've talked about, I launched the National Menopause Foundation in my late 40s, right before the pandemic. And yeah, great timing.
Big timing.
Right. But it ended up being good timing because I had an opportunity to really focus on it in a way that perhaps I wouldn't have if we weren't all trapped at home.
Right.
But I'm not the only one, because according to an AARP study of older workers, 33% of 50-somethings say that living through the pandemic made them want to improve their work-life balance, and 62% said it made them reprioritize how a job fits into their lives. That makes total sense for me because we're living longer. And if you think about it, if we change jobs in our 50s, that could be another 20 plus years of working in a job that you actually love. But that's not
Imagine that.
Right? It's not easy. So let's talk about a little bit about it. How do you counsel people to even start thinking about change?
I love the fact that you actually did it. And as you were saying that, I was thinking, I wonder what she was thinking. And I know you just asked me, but I'm going to throw the question back at you just for a second and then tag on to that. What were you thinking when you made that change? What made you take that step? And how did you do it? Because I think that that's really poignant.
Yeah. There were personal kind of questions for me, but professionally, as well as just the overwhelming thought that I couldn't believe there wasn't already one in existence. There's a nonprofit for almost everything. And to find a gap that big in an area that, like, again, we might not all become mothers in our journey as women, we will all go through menopause. So creating something that provided education and support and empowerment to women at this stage of life just seemed like this incredible opportunity. And I was lucky that my spouse, my husband still at the time, I'm still together, but he was really supportive of it. He's like, you kind of have to do this because it was a big leap, leaving your position to start something else. But that's what was really going through my mind. Like the timing just seemed to be incredible and exciting. And I wanted to give it a try.
Yeah, I love all of that. So, and I think it speaks so much to what I feel is the beginnings of what you can do to start to make change. So for you hit upon an idea. And sometimes that's a struggle for people. They don't know. They know they want to make the change, but they don't always know what. It's much easier if you have some idea of what, because then it's having the courage to actually do it. And that's somewhat of a difference. So I think sort of the answer is twofold. If you don't know what, then it's exploring, well, what really makes your heart sing? What really brings you alive? What makes you excited? And maybe you don't know exactly what it is, but what would it feel like if you were there? I'll often back into something by what does it feel like? You know, you don't have to know what it is, but you know what you want that's to the senses to come alive with. And so I think that's a key thing. And then the second thing is the courage, I think, is to really, when you start to find something and you can find the passion behind it, the reason why it's important, when you can really connect that to your values, to your soul, to that gut feeling, then I think it's easier to figure out the next steps and slowly move forward with it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too when we think about the midlife stage, because what we start to think about, or traditionally, I would guess we would probably start to think about, was like that road to retirement. Yeah. Whereas now many women and men are thinking, oh, well, what do I do now in the next stage of life? You know, I joke with people all the time. I haven't actually figured out what I want to be when I grow up yet. But right. I'm really excited to kind of continue to pursue those passions and things like that. So it's an interesting time to be thinking about change, even if you don't make that change. And, you know, you threw it back to me, but kind of my next question to you is, I also know you had a very varied career and were very successful in acting and then moved to coaching. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about how you went about that?
Yeah. So I think for me too, like many people, there was always this underlying yearning that I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to do something that felt like it mattered, like I was helping people. And I remember having a teacher way before I was even trying to change anything or change careers, where I was just like, I just want to help people. And in my head, I was like, well, you know, when I become famous enough, then I'll be able to do it. Right. And she said, I noticed this pattern within you, that there's always these many steps to actually get to what it is that you truly want to do. And she's like, what if you actually just help people? And so since I started to discover, you know, I did have a pattern of like, oh, I put all these steps and walls almost in my way. What if I actually went and explored the one thing that I really wanted? And so years later, when I was looking for a change, I thought, okay, well, if I really want to help people, what does that mean? And I had a coach back in the day when people didn't even know what a coach was. Right? Yeah. And I happened to have an exceptionally brilliant coach. I had Tony Robbins' head coach. That was my coach. You know, I mean, I learned from really one of the best. And I knew how transformational it was. It absolutely catapulted my career. I started with him, and 3 months later, I booked the soap opera. So it was like, I know it made a huge difference. And so I thought, because I had studied it so much and I was sort of became the friend, people would come and ask questions. I was like, well, let me just get this coaching certification. Again, not totally committing, but sort of dabbling. Let me see if I can just improve my skill set while I'm still doing these other things. And then I got the coaching, and then I started to coach, and I got into speaking a little at the same time. And that was when I realized how fulfilling that was. I love the excitement and the fun of the lights, camera, action. Like it's still as exciting. I still enjoy that. But if I actually compared the day-to-day work and what it was that I was doing and the feeling, the satisfaction, seeing people make those changes, seeing people light up, and seeing other people get to have the experience of living their dreams was just so, I just get so excited. I could just be like, yeah. And that's how I am with my clients. I'm like, you did it. You know? Yes. And that was when it became apparent. Well, that's a pretty important feeling. And so what if you did that more? And I was one day faced with the change of pretty big acting opportunity. It wasn't a job, but I was down to the wire on a big part or a speaking gig. And I chose the speaking. And that was really the day that I made the shift. And I decided, no, my heart wants this, my head is saying, well, this is your identity. This is who you are. This is what you should want. But actually my heart wants something else.
That's really important, that distinction, right? Because we do just get wrapped up in everything that we're thinking about, why I can't do this, what the fear of even dabbling in it, like you said, even to just, am I even going to start on that? We and I have just discussed our personal, what kind of helped us get to, I think I'm ready to make this change. But are there questions that people can start asking themselves if they're even trying to figure out if change is right for them, whether that be when we're focused on career, but even relationship or personal or any of those things? How do we even start to think about if a change might be what's needed in our lives?
I think your feelings is a really, really important place to start. Like, how are you feeling? If you wake up every day and you just can't wait to go to work, all right, not all of us feel that way every day, even when we're doing things we're passionate about. But by and large, we're really motivated. We're excited. Like, we're challenged. We feel like there's purpose, that it some level is fulfilling some greater core destiny of ours, right? If you feel that way, then you're probably doing pretty well. I would say that with a relationship too. Like, is it feeding your soul? Is it making you grow? Are you happy most of the time? This isn't like 100%, but like, is it satisfying your values? I think values is a really big one. And is it changing with you? Because we do shift and we do change. Is it growing? Is it allowing you to expand and continue? Because if we do stop growing, that's when things can start to go awry, and we start to feel like, what's the point? And we don't ever want to feel that way, because there's always a point. There's always room for us to continue on. So I think that's the first place. And if you're feeling like, no, life is awesome, I love what everything, then you're good. If you're like, no, I don't, then I think then you want to start digging into which area of your life is not really bringing you the most amount of joy. And if I can, I want to, because it sort of applies here, but it also circles back to what we were just saying. But I really do find identity is a huge one when it comes to change. And especially, and I see this a lot with everyone, but I see it even more with people who are trying to step out of corporate and into something else, because there is this identity of like that I'm a manager, I'm in charge of these people. And usually at this stage of the game, there has been some advancement, right? So there is some level of significance, of importance, and they're like, I'm going to throw all of that away to just go back and like start and be nothing. Or even like, I was a manager in banking and now all of a sudden I want to go be something in aromatherapy. Like, there's a disconnect, right? In like what is perceived value. And I think that that's a really, really, really important one to sort of, look at more seriously, right? So
You're right. Also the same sort of thing that I think it's purpose, right? It's identity and purpose, because as you said, we're talking about, making career changes or, things like that at midlife, but for some people, it is just retiring, right? Some people do want to pursue retirement and whatever that means for them.
Right.
And losing their identity, as you said, from doing whatever they did in their business to now not having a job to go to and get their identity from, can be a huge change for people. It might be why so many people start picking up extra jobs, like different jobs after retirement, because I think that is, that purpose is what we tend to get from work. And then when that goes away, it can leave us feeling a little lost.
It can. And I find that there is a distinction between purpose and identity, because the identity tends to be the sort of overall, how people see us, how the worth that we get from who we are, right? The purpose, I think, is a little more soul driven, a little more gut driven, a little more heart driven, of like, are we actually satisfying some deeper need of ourselves in our life? And so absolutely, they're both important. But yeah, and I think when people are sort of losing that identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also regaining the identity, because I also see this with moms who've maybe, they lost their identity once. So they left the job to sort of maybe become a mom.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're like, well, I'm nothing, which is so crazy and not true. And now they're trying to regain something else. And so there's this constant like shedding and re-identifying. And I think it's really important to know that your soul is who your soul is, right? And your purpose is what your purpose is. And the identity is what we attach ourselves to, or what perhaps other people attach to us. But that when that's a driver, it can sometimes impede the process. When we can sort of disconnect from that and connect more to your purpose, then we can sort of move out and make that change happen.
That makes perfect sense. As you said, right? That looking for that purpose becomes a much deeper question and a deeper answer, probably than again, what does the external world think of our identity and what we've been doing? And that's why I'm so amazed. I mean, we all know there's so many people in our social circles and even in culturally that we've seen, we keep talking about like that reinvent themselves. Like how many times is Madonna going to reinvent herself as a different type of, singer, those kinds of things. And we all focus on that. Oh, well, she was a pop singer and now she's doing this and all of those things, but again, have nothing to do with who she is. That's just how she wants to express herself. And so we all have an opportunity to do that, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
I also think, and I love how you've developed your company and Moticise, and how that brings about change, if you want it, or just, development in a kind of unique and creative way. So let's talk a little bit tell us everybody about Moticise and how you kind of developed that program.
So, and it definitely was coming during one of my bigger changes, probably not by mistake. So Moticise is really a combination. It's almost an equal parts coaching and exercise. And the exercise can vary a little bit depending upon what your level or desire is. It started as more of an aerobic thing where the mindset very much matched the movement. And that still exists, but then it sort of branched out to if you want to do a treadmill or an elliptical or a bike, a spin bike, or if you just want to take a walk outside. So it's as long as you're moving, that is key. And the coaching happens while you're doing that. And it's very much based on this idea that we know now of when you exercise, your brain changes. There's all these chemical changes that are going on. Besides the good feeling chemicals, there's also this BDNF that's released that creates new neural cells in our brain and new neural pathways when we connect it to an emotional response. And so it's tapping into that, because that happens when you exercise. Exercise actually creates that scenario. So it makes it a very ideal time to be creative, to be more focused, to make stronger decisions, to actually, and I find it ironic, right? Tap the motivation side of our brain. And so if you can just get moving, then you'll be motivated to move. And then also it taps what I like to call your body intelligence, because I feel so strongly in Western, maybe, philosophy. I guess we think through a lot of things, right? But we forget sometimes we have this other half of ourselves.
Right.
And our body has just an enormous amount. The answers, I believe, exist within. And so when we move, we start to shake up the patterns of thinking and start to help us access the knowledge, the knowing, those inner feelings that we have within us. And so Moticise is a 7-step process, 7 questions that really gear you to around a goal. So it's guided around a specific goal, and it includes other questions, visualizations, some affirmations. So all of that happens while you're moving with the intention of going from a thought or perhaps an idea, but sometimes it's just a thought or a feeling to a specific action item that you can then go and take to move the process along.
As we talked about, the first time you and I spoke, I just think this makes such sense to me, because I think we all know, or at least I know, I experienced when you're stuck on something and you get up, I'm just going to take a walk, just to clear your mind, just to do something, just to activate, right? That body thing.
Yeah.
we do that pretty much every day. And we see that happening for ourselves in what we do. So it makes sense that you could actually do that in a really constructive way to think through some bigger things or challenges or goals. And so I love that process that you've created. It really does seem to tap into what we kind of naturally do, but don't think about.
Exactly. I agree. I totally agree, right? You're sitting at your desk. You're like, I can't think of it. I can't figure it out. I don't know. Get up, go to the bathroom, take a shower, whatever. And you're just like, I got it, And so that's it. That's happening. That's not a mistake. And so it is harnessing that power and just being intentional about it.
Yeah. And so, like I said, we'll definitely have, links to your book and to your coaching things and all that stuff so people can kind of dive in a little deeper and learn more about that. But like we said, even just thinking through, it doesn't have to be major changes, but if you're stuck on something, you're trying to figure something out, get up and move and think about it while you're walking around the block or getting a little fresh air or doing something like that, or your morning, evening, afternoon exercise, whatever it is that you do it,
right?
Sort of saving a question or something that you can mull over while you do that exercise is really kind of interesting too. But I know, as you've, have shared with me before, that Moticise, that process, those series of questions that you ask someone are very purposeful.
They are.
Really set to bring about that action, as you said, that sometimes we can get an idea, but that doesn't work through, well, now what do I do with that idea? And the Moticise sort of takes them through. Am I right? The whole
totally, absolutely, yes. There was a lot of testing on the order of those questions and which questions kind of helped move it along the best and the fastest. And so, I do feel I'm usually so flexible about everything, but I'm like, do the questions in order because it matters.
That's it. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It does. It will help. Could you do it out of order? Of course you can, but it does help it because it really guides you from the vision to. And I think we talked about this once before. What do you have? Because I feel like that is such an underestimated question.
So I want to talk a little bit about what happens then if someone is apprehensive about a change, or what if someone has maybe done that, they make a change and it doesn't work out. And now I hate the terminology, but like gun shy, right? That now we're not as open to that change. Do you have suggestions on how people can work through that process of maybe doing things a little bit differently, or is it following a certain amount of questions to get back to the idea that it's okay to make change that's not the end all be all, and that it's still important that you think through these questions of change moving forward in your life?
No, I think it's a great question. And I think, look, as human beings inherently, we don't love change, It is part of our survival mechanism, right? Let's just keep things the way they are, and anything outside of that is just a little scary. So I think going in knowing that like all change can feel a little different, and yet the rewards that we get from it are just so massive and so huge that when you look back, you tend to think, oh, thank goodness I did that. And life would never be this way if I didn't have the courage to take those steps. And I think most of us, especially at this point in our life, have some evidence of that too. Yeah. So we may not always look for it, but when we look for it, we will find it. So kind of where in our lives do we have that? And what did you do in order to make that happen? So I think we should use our history in the good way. Now, if you make a change that doesn't work out, I do think it's important to sort of step back and really take a deep dive and see what was it? Because I think we sometimes write it off as like change is bad, and it's definitely not. There was probably something along that ride that maybe could be tweaked. And whether it be the idea, whether it be how you went about doing it, whether it was how your mindset was while taking that action. Any of those things can impact the results. And so I think it's an opportunity really to step back and be like, okay, so that's learning. How can we take this and how can we do it even better next time? And sort of like come with a fresh approach, fresh approach and fresh strategy and the mindset that will help you. So I get it. It definitely does. And I feel like my world of rejection, every audition I had and every time I was told something that I wasn't enough felt like that. Like, well, that didn't work. So then I can't do it, And so it was constantly this refocus, recalibrate, and go back with a new attitude and a new perspective. Wipe the slate clean, because every single time you start something, really, in fact, is a new time.
You're right. That's absolutely true. We do it over and over again, from little to big throughout our day. And so it shouldn't seem like it's such a hurdle or something to be so, worried about. But obviously, when it comes to the big things, that is a little bit more of a stressor for people, I think, to sort of think through the change.
I think it's also really important to surround yourself with people who get that. So when you have those little dips or those things that don't work out, to make sure you're with people who can help you reframe and refocus and not be like, see, you shouldn't have done it. You know what I mean? Like that is, you need to have your group of people, whoever that is, whether it be a coach, a therapist, a mentor, a good friend, a spouse, whatever. Make sure you have those people around you, because it will happen. It's going to happen at some point. We all have it, no matter what your job is, whether you're making a change or not. You're going to have some things that don't work out perfectly. And so I think it's just important to really note that and to find a way to sort of reset. Can I say one more thing about that, actually?
Yeah.
Because this was something I did learn from the acting, is allow yourself to also have the feelings, to go through the experience of whatever disappointment or whatever sadness, or whatever anger, or whatever frustration you might have had, and then move forward to objectively look at it. We want to try to avoid carrying that with us, because one of the things that I found, maybe more in hindsight, but with some of the auditioning, particularly before I worked with a coach, was that I was like, okay, I just got to get back up on the horse. I got to get going again. Let me just do it again. Let me do it again. After repeated failures, because there were, I was starting to drag it and just stuff it and pretend it wasn't there. Like, okay, it's fine. I'm going to be fine. Let me just get back up and do it again. And there was a disconnect of my actual feelings. And eventually that started to build up and impact a little bit more how I operated. So now I'm really, really, all right, take your day or whatever. It doesn't have to make it a year, but take a moment to really, like, day, week, month, to just like be okay with that. Like, just go through the process and then come back, and then let's look objectively and move forward from that new, fresh place.
That's a really good point. Sometimes we just want to push it aside and just move on. And like you said, we need to take that moment to reflect and think about the good and the bad. What did we learn from whatever the situation was? And then how to move forward. Well, it's no surprise that the title of this episode is The Courage to Change, because it does. It takes courage. Like we said, it's big changes and small changes, but it can be such a powerful thing to be open to change when it happens. Because the other thing, we could do a whole nother podcast on when change is forced upon you. Like, maybe you didn't want to make the change. Right. You're sort of put in a situation where change, but some of the basics of that, I think, are very similar, right? That's to take the time to ask yourself the right questions, to figure out how to motivate, and certainly to find your people and surround yourself with that, that positivity, because, right, you can surround yourself with people who never take any risks, and they'll always say, oh, no, you shouldn't have done it. But another group would be like, oh, well, that's fantastic. And did you learn this? And maybe this now, So it does sometimes take that. And as you said, there are so many opportunities these days to connect with people, either professionally or personally, as a coach, or again, like you said, a therapist or a priest or whomever it is, to sort of help you think through whatever that change is that you're struggling with, and having the courage to kind of move through it. So I love this topic. I think this is so wonderful. And as we've said, I know there are other things that we can talk about on future podcasts, and I would love to do that. And so I appreciate so much, Sonia, you being here with us today and sharing your expertise in this area.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And I want to add to celebrate the successes you have along the way. I think that is such an important piece of the pie, especially when you're going through change or even contemplating it. Those little steps, those little things. And it doesn't have to be some big extravagant celebration, but really, really take in, I did that. Like, because we so often just dismiss it like, yeah, that was no big deal. That was nothing. It was like, yes, actually it is a big deal and it is something. And those moments are the moments that will accumulate to make the greatness that you're creating. So celebrate them.
So true. That is wonderful. Thank you again so much, Sonia, for being with us. As I mentioned, we'll include additional information and resources about your work with the notes of this episode so our listeners can learn more and follow up. I hope you've all enjoyed this episode. If you have, please subscribe to the Positive Pause podcast so you never miss an episode. And please share the information with your family and friends. Thanks again to my guest, Sonia Satra, founder and CEO of Moticise. And thank you for listening. We hope you'll tune in to another episode of The Positive Pause.
Thank you.